January 15th, 1978, Tallahassee, Florida, 3 o'clock in the morning. The air hung thick with humidity, unusual for a winter night in the Panhandle, the kind of atmospheric pressure that makes sleep restless and leaves bedroom windows cracked open despite the chill. Inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, silence occupied the hallways like a third presence. Outside, oak branches swayed under sodium streetlights, casting shadows that moved across white columns in rhythms that resembled breathing. The door was unlocked. It had been unlocked for hours, and in that unlocked door lived the distance between what the young women sleeping inside believed about the world and what the world was about to teach them. When Nita Neary returned to the sorority house at 3 a.m., she saw a man leaving through the front door. He carried nothing. He wore a dark jacket and a blue knit cap pulled low. He turned briefly, and she saw his profile in the amber light. A clean face, expressionless, deliberate. She did not scream. There was no reason to scream yet. But when she walked upstairs and pushed open the door to Karen Chandler's room, she found her roommate, Kathy Kleiner, conscious but broken. Her jaw shattered, her face disfigured by blunt force. In another room, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy would never wake again. Bowman had been strangled with a nylon stocking. Levy had been bludgeoned, sexually assaulted, bitten on her left buttock with such force that the indentations remained visible in her skin like a signature. The violence had taken less than 15 minutes. No one had heard anything except muffled thuds and the sound of running footsteps. The unlocked door had done its work. This was not the beginning of Theodore Robert Bundy's story. This was the end approaching its conclusion. The final acceleration of a man who had been killing across 7 states for more than 4 years. Seattle, Washington, February 1st, 1974. Linda Ann Healy disappeared from her basement bedroom in the University District. She was 21 years old, a psychology major, known for delivering the morning ski report on local radio. Her bed was made with hospital corners. Blood had soaked through the pillow, through the sheets, into the mattress. Her nightgown was found in the closet, carefully folded. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever took her had either been invited in or had moved through her space with such precision that locks and latches became irrelevant. Her body would not be found for more than a year. Between January and July of 1974, 8 women disappeared in Washington and Oregon. They were young, white, middle class, with long, dark hair parted in the middle. They vanished from college campuses, shopping centers, parks. Witnesses described a man who called himself Ted. He was charming. He wore his arm in a sling and asked for help loading books into his car, or he pretended to be a campus security officer. He had a Volkswagen Beetle, tan-colored, inconspicuous, the kind of car that blended into every parking lot in America. Inside that car was a crowbar, handcuffs, rope, and a tire iron. The car smelled like gasoline and decay. On July 14, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park, witnesses saw a man approach Janice Ann Ott. He asked for her help loading a sailboat onto his car. She agreed. Hours later, he approached Denise Naslund and used the same story. Both women disappeared in broad daylight, in front of families grilling hamburgers and children playing frisbee. Their remains were found weeks later in a forested area east of Issaquah. Animals had scattered the bones. Forensic examiners found evidence of blunt force trauma to the skulls. The site, according to King County Detective Robert Keppel, was a multi-use environment. Bundy had returned to it repeatedly, not just to dispose of bodies, but to revisit them. The women believed they were helping someone. They believed that daylight offered protection. They believed that their intuition would signal danger. Ted Bundy understood this. He weaponized their belief in decency. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, to Eleanor Louise Cowell, an unmarried 22-year-old woman. His biological father's identity remains uncertain. For the first years of his life, Bundy was raised in Philadelphia by his maternal grandparents, who told him that his mother was his sister. When the deception unraveled, Bundy was moved to Tacoma, Washington, where his mother married Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook. Theodore took his stepfather's surname. He was intelligent, articulate, well-mannered. He attended the University of Washington, majored in psychology, and later enrolled in law school at the University of Utah. He worked at a suicide hotline. He was involved in local Republican politics. He had girlfriends, friends, professors who respected him. He looked like what people wanted America to look like. But Bundy carried something else. He was obsessed with control, with the performance of normalcy, with the distance between the self he presented and the self he protected. He studied criminal psychology not to prevent crime, but to understand its execution. He consumed detective magazines and true crime stories. He learned from the mistakes of other killers. When he began murdering women in 1974, he did so with a precision that suggested extensive planning. He selected victims who resembled a woman who had rejected him years earlier. He used charm as anesthesia. And when the violence began, it was methodical, sustained, and devoid of hesitation. November 8, 1974, Murray, Utah. Carol DeRanch was shopping at the Fashion Place Mall when a man approached her. He identified himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department. He told her that someone had attempted to break into her car and asked her to accompany him to the station to file a report. She followed him to his Volkswagen. Once inside, he attempted to handcuff her. She fought. He swung a crowbar at her head. She grabbed the door handle, fell out of the moving car, and ran. She survived because she refused to believe what he was telling her. Later that night, 17-year-old Deborah Jean Kent disappeared from a high school parking lot in Bountiful, Utah. Her body has never been found. But Carol DeRanch's escape became the first crack in Bundy's facade. She described the man. She described his car. She identified the handcuffs found in his possession when he was arrested 9 months later. On March 1, 1976, Bundy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in a Utah state prison. Prosecutors in Colorado charged him with the murder of Corinne Campbell, a nurse who had disappeared from a ski resort in Snowmass in January 1975. Bundy was extradited to Colorado to stand trial. The handcuffs became a recurring image in the investigation. They were a tool, yes, but they were also a symbol of Bundy's need to possess, to immobilize, to transform another human being into an object that could not resist. Carol DeRanch escaped because she understood, in a moment of animal clarity, that the handcuffs were not about safety. They were about control. June 7, 1977, Aspen, Colorado. Bundy, acting as his own attorney, was granted access to the Pitkin County Courthouse Law Library. During a recess, he jumped from a second-story window 25 feet above the ground and fled into the mountains. He was recaptured 6 days later, dehydrated and disoriented. On December 30, 1977, he escaped again, this time from the Glenwood Springs jail. He had lost 35 pounds through dieting. He sawed through the ceiling of his cell, crawled into the ductwork, and emerged in the apartment of a jailer who was not home. He stole clothing and walked out the front door. By the time authorities discovered he was missing, he had been gone for 17 hours. Bundy took a plane to Chicago, then a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. He stole a car and drove to Atlanta. From there, he took a Greyhound bus to Tallahassee, Florida, arriving on January 8, 1978. He rented a room near Florida State University under a false name. He stole credit cards, shoplifted food, burglarized apartments. For a week, he lived as a ghost, moving through a college town where no one knew his face. The escapes revealed something investigators had underestimated. Bundy was not impulsive. He was not disorganized. Every action was calculated to exploit the assumption that he was harmless because he looked harmless. His charm was not a personality trait. It was a strategy. January 15, 1978, 3 a.m., Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house and murdered Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. He bludgeoned Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, both of whom survived. 30 minutes later, he broke into the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, 8 blocks away, and bludgeoned her while she slept. She survived but suffered permanent hearing loss and equilibrium damage. On February 9, 1978, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her junior high school in Lake City, Florida. She was his youngest victim. Her body was found 8 weeks later in an abandoned hogshed. Cause of death, homicidal violence to the neck. On February 15, 1978, at 1:34 a.m., Pensacola police officer David Lee noticed a Volkswagen driving erratically. He ran the plates. The car was stolen. When Lee attempted a traffic stop, Bundy fled. After a brief chase, the officer subdued him. Bundy gave a false name. 2 days later, he revealed his true identity. The investigation that followed relied on 3 categories of evidence: eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and forensic innovation. Nita Neary identified Bundy in court as the man she saw leaving the Chi Omega house. Fibers from the stolen Volkswagen matched fibers found at the crime scenes. A pantyhose mask found in Cheryl Thomas's apartment contained hairs microscopically consistent with Bundy's. Credit card receipts placed him in the vicinity of the abduction sites. But the most significant evidence came from Lisa Levy's body. Dr. Richard Souviron, a forensic odontologist, examined the bite mark on her left buttock. He photographed it. He measured it. He compared it to dental impressions taken from Bundy's teeth. Bundy's teeth were chipped, misaligned, and irregular. The bite mark matched in every measurable dimension. In court, Dr. Souviron placed a transparent overlay of Bundy's dental impressions over the photographs of the bite mark. The alignment was undeniable. It was one of the first cases in American legal history in which bite mark evidence was used to secure a murder conviction. The bite mark became the central symbol of the case. It was the moment Bundy lost control. It was the signature he could not erase. July 24, 1979, Miami, Florida. After a trial that was broadcast nationally, Theodore Robert Bundy was found guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy and the attempted murders of Karen Chandler, Kathy Kleiner, and Cheryl Thomas. Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death. In his remarks, the judge said, "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It's a tragedy to this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. But you went another way, partner." In February 1980, Bundy was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of Kimberly Leach and sentenced to death a second time. Over the next 9 years, he filed multiple appeals. He gave interviews. He corresponded with FBI Special Agent William Hagmaier, who visited him on death row repeatedly. Hagmaier later described Bundy as highly intelligent, manipulative, and emotionally detached. Bundy enjoyed discussing his crimes in the third person, as if they had been committed by someone else. He spoke about the victims as objects, as opportunities. He showed no remorse. He showed no recognition of their humanity. In the days before his execution, Bundy confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1973 and 1978. Investigators believe the actual number is higher, possibly exceeding 50. He described in detail how he returned to decomposing remains, how he applied makeup to their faces, how he committed acts of necrophilia. He described decapitating at least 12 victims and keeping their heads as souvenirs. He did not confess out of guilt. He confessed to delay his execution and to retain control over the narrative. On January 24, 1989, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed by electrocution at Florida State Prison in Starke. Outside the prison, crowds gathered. Some held signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." Others lit fireworks. He was pronounced dead at 7:16 a.m. He was 42 years old. The bite mark on Lisa Levy's body was the detail that destroyed him. Not the eyewitnesses, not the stolen credit cards, not the fibers or the hair samples. It was the bite mark, the evidence he left in a moment of sadistic pleasure, the proof that he had lost the control he spent years cultivating. Forensic odontology was still an emerging field in 1979, and Bundy's conviction helped legitimize it. Decades later, bite mark evidence has been called into question by researchers who argue that it lacks scientific rigor. But in 1979, it was revolutionary. It was the bridge between the body and the perpetrator. Bundy's case also transformed law enforcement protocols. His ability to cross state lines without detection exposed the lack of communication between jurisdictions. Investigators in Washington had no way of knowing that similar disappearances were occurring in Utah and Colorado. After Bundy, the FBI established the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, a centralized database designed to track patterns in serial offenses. The case advanced criminal profiling. FBI analysts classified Bundy as an organized, psychopathic sexual predator, a profile that became foundational in the behavioral science unit's approach to serial homicide. His escapes led to reforms in jail security procedures, particularly regarding inmates who represent themselves in court. But the deeper transformation was psychological. Bundy shattered the assumption that evil looks a certain way. He was educated, articulate, handsome, politically active. He was the boy next door. He was the man parents wanted their daughters to date. And he used that image as camouflage. His victims trusted him because they had been taught to trust people who looked like him. That was his greatest weapon. In the final interview between Bundy and FBI agent William Hagmaier, conducted on January 23, 1989, the day before Bundy's execution, Hagmaier asked him what he wanted people to understand. Bundy said that violence had become an addiction, that pornography had desensitized him, that he had reached a point where he could no longer feel the boundary between fantasy and action. He spoke carefully, as if his words carried explanatory power. But he offered no accountability. He offered no recognition of the 36 families who spent decades without answers, without bodies, without graves. He offered no acknowledgement that the women he killed had names, dreams, futures. He had reduced them to abstractions. The truth about Ted Bundy is not complicated. He killed because he wanted to. He killed because he could. He killed because it gave him a sense of power that no other experience provided. He was not shaped by childhood trauma, although his early life was marked by instability. He was not driven by psychosis, although his mind operated in ways that defied empathy. He was a man who discovered that violence answered a need within him, and he pursued that need with intelligence, discipline, and relentless focus. The unlocked door at the Chi Omega house was not the cause of what happened that night, but it was the entry point, the architectural flaw that Bundy exploited. Locks only work when they are engaged. Trust only protects when it is earned. Bundy understood that most people operate on the assumption of safety, that they believe their environment is fundamentally benign. He identified that assumption and weaponized it. 36 years after his execution, the name Ted Bundy still carries weight. It is invoked in courtrooms, documentaries, university classrooms. His face appears in retrospectives about the nature of evil. But the faces that should be remembered are those of Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gale Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgian Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Melissa Smith, Laura Aim, Deborah Kent, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Lynette Culver, Susan Curtis, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Cheryl Thomas, Kimberly Leach, and all the others whose names were never confirmed, whose bodies were never found, whose families still live in the space between grief and uncertainty. They were not abstractions. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had favorite songs, inside jokes, plans for the weekend. And in a moment of profound violence, they were taken from a world that should have protected them. Ted Bundy did not teach us anything new about human nature. He reminded us of something we already knew but preferred not to examine, that cruelty does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, with a smile, asking for help. And the only defense against it is vigilance, skepticism, and the willingness to recognize that safety is not a given. It is a discipline. It is a practice. And it must be maintained even when the door is heavy, even when the night is warm, even when the face at the threshold looks harmless. The handcuffs remain. The bite mark remains. The bodies remain. And so does the question that survivors carry forward. How do we protect what we cannot predict? How do we lock doors that we did not know were open? There is no answer that satisfies. There is only the archive of violence, the testimony of those who lived, and the silence of those who did not.